Hello friends, are you ready? Let's begin. Imagine that there was a case in which the witness was a ghost and the ruling was based on the words of the ghost, the court, and the public prosecutor. Take the ghost's word for the case, meaning that this ghost is the one who solved the case. This story is not imaginary or made up. This is a real and consistent ghost story like the story of the ghosts of Flight 401 that I told before. In order not to bore you with the introduction, let's begin their story. What are they doing, guys? I hope you are all well and in good health. In the early evening of January 23, 1897, that is, more than 120 years ago, there was a blacksmith named Erasmus. On that day, the blacksmith lit a fire in his furnace in his workshop in the state of West Virginia. This blacksmith had an 11-year-old boy or assistant in the workshop. At that time, he was cleaning and polishing the head of a razor in the workshop. He was supposed to close the workshop. He goes, but he had an urgent job. A customer asked him to make him a horseshoe, so he knew that this would melt him down a bit and he would close the workshop late. Rasmus wanted to check on his wife if she needed anything from him before he went home because at that time there were no phones or cell phones, so he asked his boy to leave what he had in his hands and go to his house, which is the blacksmith's house, and go tell his wife that he would be late at work and see if she needed anything or help her with anything in the housework. The name of this blacksmith's wife was Zona, not the boy from the workshop. Carrick's Moss would complete his work on the horseshoe that he was shaping with a hammer over the fire, but at that moment, Erasmus's mind was not on the horseshoe, his mind was all occupied with his wife Zona. His wife at that time was pregnant, and she did not tell anyone in their family or acquaintances about this new pregnancy. Rasmus and Zona had only known each other for 2 months. They fell in love very quickly. Zona was 23 years old at that time. She was a beautiful girl with a beautiful black complexion and black eyes. She loved to laugh and joke. She was born and raised on a farm, which is a rural girl. When Erasmus arrived at this small village at the foot of the mountain, and this village was near the place where Zona lived, they got to know each other quickly. Erasmus was older than Zona, and he was 35 years old. He was a tall, handsome young man with blue eyes. He was the generation of this small village in order to establish his blacksmith workshop. Earth was like an angel to Zona who came down to her from heaven, but as for Zona's family, especially her mother, whose name was Earth, she did not want her daughter to marry this young man because she saw that he was much older than her. Secondly, he did not know any family, so he came to them like that and established his workshop. However, it is not known what his origin and lineage were or who his family was, but Zona was a girl. She was very stubborn and was determined to marry Erasmus, and she didn't care about anything. In November, after only 2 months of knowing each other, they got married and then they lived in a small house. She quickly became pregnant and they were both very happy about the pregnancy and wanted to make their family, friends, and acquaintances happy with the news. However, Zona was suffering from severe complications in her pregnancy and was sick all the time because of her pregnancy. So she and her husband decided to postpone announcing the news of the pregnancy to the people for a period of time because she felt that the pregnancy might be miscarried and not completed due to the constant fatigue she was in. At the end of January, at the time when there were pills in the workshop, he was trying to finish the horseshoe quickly so as not to be too late for his wife and go check on her and make sure that she was fine. At that time, his assistant or boy arrived at his house and passed through the gate. He stopped in front of the main door of the house, which was 2 stories high. The boy knocked on the door, but no one opened it for him or answered him. When the blacksmith used to send him to deliver orders to the house. He was used to hearing Zona walking around the house, opening the door and talking to any of the neighbors or walking around doing anything around the house when he knocked on the door. She would quickly open it for him, but this time he didn't hear anyone in the house. The house was empty, no one was there. He knocked a second and third time, and still no one answered him. He grabbed the door and tried to open it. He found it opened for him. As soon as he opened the door, he noticed that the house was dark from the inside, with no lights on, even though it was after sunset. He entered the house and kept calling Zuna. No one answered him. At a certain point, at the first step of the stairs leading to the second floor, the boy stood in his place, frozen in fear because at that place he saw Zuna lying on the ground. She was lying on her back with her hands on her chest. The little boy was scared and didn't know what had happened. How would he act? But it was clear that something serious had happened. The boy began to approach Zona little by little until he was above her head. He kept shouting at her to get up, but she did not show any signs or information. He got scared and ran out of the house and went to his house and informed his mother of what had happened. He told her, "It seems that the wife of the owner of the business has died." The mother left her house and quickly went to the workshop of Arasus and told him to hurry up with his wife because she was lying on the ground and not speaking in your house. They brought the doctor who had treated Zona before and was following up with her pregnancy complications. It took the doctor an hour to get to the blacksmith's house. As soon as he got home, the boy found the blacksmith's boy, his mother, and other neighbors gathered on the ground floor of the house. Then, when he went up to the second floor, to the master bedroom, there was Rasmus sitting on the bed and Zona was sleeping on her back. He had put his hands together and was stroking her hair he swayed his body while crying. The doctor knew how to read his name well because he was coming to them a lot because he was monitoring the complications of the pregnancy in his room, so he saw this sad scene and neglected it, but he knew that he had to do his work. So he went to the tablets and put his hand on his shoulder and said to him, "Sorry, I will ask your permission so that I can examine her well, Erasmus," and it is not as if he heard anything. And he preferred as he was hugging Zona and stroking her hair while swinging his body and crying, so the doctor asked him to hold on a little and make room for him so he could examine her. So Erasmus got up from his place and rested his wife's head on the pillow and smoothed her hair next to her while she was sleeping, and while the doctor was examining her, Erasmus was on his knees at the head of the bed next to her head and was stroking her hair while crying. After the doctor finished the examination, he confirmed that she was dead and said that the cause of her death might have been that she fell down the stairs due to pregnancy complications. She fainted and fell and had internal bleeding and died the next day. Zona's funeral was held in the local cemetery that was on a high hill, and all those present at the funeral were telling each other that this poor woman died while she was pregnant, and they were all feeling sorry for her husband, Erasmus, who was tearing himself apart from crying and grieving for her to the point that he was taking his time, and of course no one would be able to blame him. He was just a man, his wife, his first child. Why in the world? Imagine that all of this was destroyed in a moment before they buried her. They opened the coffin, Erasmus. They brought a scarf from his wife's signs and put the sign on the back of her neck. He told those present at the funeral that this was her favorite sign. After that, they closed the coffin on her and lowered it into the ground. As I told you a while ago, all the people at the funeral were very affected by the condition of one heritage. His entire family was lost to him in one blow. So naturally, this would be his condition. But despite all this sadness, the only person at the funeral who was not affected or upset or showed any reaction to the sadness was his mother, Zona, whose name was when they saw her go out of the house. If they saw her in the street, she would walk absent-mindedly and not talk to anyone. When she walked in the city, they would hear her in the street talking to herself in incomprehensible words. Suddenly, she would keep looking behind her back as if she was afraid of someone walking behind her. One of her neighbors he saw her in the street trying to reassure her. She was covering her face and afraid to look him in the eye and refused any words and ran away from him. No one knew what happened to this woman. Even her husband did not talk to anyone in the city about her condition, but they noticed that her husband did not spend the night with her at home and went to sleep in the barn and left her alone in the house. On the morning of February 21st, about a month after Zona's death, Marjane left her house wearing clean clothes. Unlike every time when she walked, She did not care about her appearance, and this time she was talking to herself and did not prefer to look behind her while she was terrified. She was walking with her back straight like a soldier walking in a line of pedestrians, and the only emotion that people noticed was evident on her face that day, which was anger. She continued to walk in this manner until she reached the local public prosecutor's office, and instead of knocking on the door and waiting for someone to open it for her and say, "Come in," she opened the door without knocking and entered the public prosecutor's office by herself. The city knew Marjean's story and knew that she was acting strangely after the death of her daughter Zona. When she entered the office once, they were shocked by her presence and asked to speak directly with the public prosecutor. The man, out of his astonishment and curiosity, told her to leave the office. Marjean continued to tell the public prosecutor this strange story about the death of her daughter Zona. The man, after hearing the story from her, did not know what to say to her, but he knew that he was dealing with a woman whose mind was disturbed because of the death of her daughter, and all the sadness she had been feeling in the past days made her go crazy and lose her mind. This woman spent 2 hours in the public prosecutor's office telling her story. After a while, the public prosecutor felt that her words were not just nonsense and that they had a great meaning. Doubts began to grow more and more inside him. After Mary Jane told this strange story about her dead daughter, the public prosecutor was convinced by her words that they were true and knew that he had to remove Zona's body from her body. After Marjolin left the office and went to the house of the doctor who was treating Zona and who saw her after she died and confirmed her death, the public prosecutor said to the doctor, "We want to exhume Zona's body." The doctor was shocked and asked him, "What's wrong? I don't understand anything." But after the public prosecutor told him Marjean's crazy story, the doctor agreed and told him, "Okay, I have no problem. We'll exhume her and examine her again." The next day, February 22nd, the public prosecutor arrived at Zona's grave with several men carrying digging tools. They dug and took out her coffin, and one of the workers took out her body. Her body had not yet decomposed because at that time of the year the ground was very cold. Anyway, they entered with the body at a nearby school, and in one of the rooms they put it on a table. Everyone left the room except the doctor and the public prosecutor. As soon as the room was empty, the doctor began examining Zona's body for the second time. After only about a second of examination, the doctor and the public prosecutor discovered that it was in. The body is the important thing that Marjean talked about in the story, and after the doctor and the general supervisor saw this thing, they kept looking at each other in surprise and not believing what they were seeing. This means that Marjean's strange story is a real story, not imaginary. Listen to the terrifying story, stranger than fiction, that Marjean told the public prosecutor on the day of Zona's funeral. Although her mother, Marjean, was very sad inside about her daughter's death, the feelings that were more dominant in her than the feelings of sadness were the intense hatred towards her daughter's husband, Ira's Misser. She couldn't stand to see him crying at the funeral. She felt that she was forced to see him against her will at the funeral, as if she wanted to tell him, "This is my daughter's funeral and this belongs to me. What brought you here?" She was annoyed with the people at the funeral, and they were very affected by the sadness that was in the tablets, as if she wanted to tell them that you like the acting that he is acting, so she was directing all her feelings while ignoring them, and she felt inside that there was something wrong in Medina. The surprise ended, and the only one who had the key to solving this puzzle was Zuna, who definitely died. This wrong thing that was a pity for her daughter's death had eaten her entire mind, and at the moment the funeral ended and she left, her feelings of hatred towards Rasmus had ended. All her thinking at that moment was how to communicate with her dead daughter, because she knew and was sure that her daughter was the one who had the answer. She entered her room, knelt on her knees, and began to pray. She was not praying to ask God for health, protection, and peace. She was praying for her daughter's ghost to appear and talk to her and tell her how she died. Everything that Margine was doing this month was obsessed with the idea of summoning her daughter's ghost, basically to tell her that how did she die? She kept lighting candles and praying in her room. While she was praying, she kept looking around. Maybe her daughter's ghost had come or was on its way to come. There was no sign that he had come. For example, they opened the window all at once or blew out all the candles. She kept looking for any sign or any indication of her daughter's ghost's appearance. She kept praying and looking around. Maybe the ghost would appear. She stayed in this state until one night in the middle of February. Like every time, she was praying in her room with candles lit around her. Suddenly, while she was praying that night, a very bright light appeared in the middle of her room. When this light appeared in the room, it became very cold inside. Margine kept concentrating on this light, hoping that this was her daughter, Zona. But just as quickly as the light appeared, it disappeared all at once, and the coldness disappeared from the room and it returned to its normal temperature. Margine was very excited that her prayers had finally yielded results, and this was what appeared. It would be her daughter's ghost, or that this was a sign that the ghost would come. So Margine doubled her prayers in the hope that her daughter's ghost would appear. During the next 2 days, this bright light appeared twice in her room, and each time it disappeared very quickly. Margine was surprised by what was happening, but she was reassured by her prayers, which were working. Finally, the 4th time, Margine was praying and lighting candles. The bright light appeared in her room, and the atmosphere began to get cold. Mary Jane said that she saw her daughter Zuna coming out of this light and materializing in the middle of the room. She said that her daughter was wearing completely black clothes, and her eyes were going inside, and her hair was spread over her shoulder. She was standing in her place, looking at her mother. When Margine saw her daughter's ghost in reality, she was very terrified. Although she had been trying to summon her daughter's ghost all this month, she had a strong feeling that it might appear, and she had prepared herself for this. But when she saw it, the truth was that she did not expect to be terrified by him in this way, and from the terror she was in, she started to step back and her daughter's ghost started to advance towards her, and she kept stepping back terrified until her back hit the wall and the ghost was getting closer to her. At that moment she forced herself to control her nerves because this was the moment she was waiting for and she did not want to waste it. She had to be strong and talk to this ghost to know what happened to her daughter, and the only question that Mary Jane was able to say to the ghost was, "How did you die?" And when she said that, the ghost of her daughter stopped, and the ghost opened his mouth wide and started to extract dirt and vomiting from his mouth the color of black, and in a low and rough voice she started to tell her mother the story. She told her that Akras was obvious to people that he was a good, successful and hard-working person in his work, but behind closed doors, he was a monster, not a human being. He used to beat her and scream in her face for the most trivial reasons, and on the night of January 22nd, one day before the boy discovered Zuna lying on the top of the stairs of the house, Zuna's ghost told his mother that today Muzafi's tablets were very angry because of the food that Zuna had made for dinner. He wanted to eat meat and she had cooked something else and he was upset. Zuna said, "No problem. I will make you another meal. Calm down, but I missed it." He told her, "I will still wait until you make another one." With all his strength, he grabbed Zuna by the neck and lifted her off the ground. At that moment, while the ghost was telling what had happened, Zuna's ghost suddenly stopped talking. After that, this terrifying look appeared in the ghost's eyes, as if he was recalling those terrifying memories with erases. At that moment, while the ghost was standing in his place and with that terrifying look on his face, this ghost began to rise from the ground up into the air and opened his mouth wide and did not make any sound. All the air in the room began to be sucked in and enter his mouth as if he was sucking the air in the room. Suddenly, the sound of the neck cracking was heard when the ghost turned its head back 180 degrees, but the front of the ghost's body was as it was in front of Margine. Margine was shocked by this sight, and then suddenly the ghost fell to the ground, its chest facing the mother, and Zona's head, or the ghost's head, was facing backwards. The ghost began to circle around itself to start leaving the room, and because she turned her body and her head was facing backwards, this means that the head was facing the mother, Margine. Margine says at that moment, she saw her daughter's face smiling as if she was telling her while walking, "I saw what he did to me." Zona's ghost disappeared, and the room became warm again. Again, Margine felt very tired and threw her body on the bed and kept crying. She got up the next morning and ran to the Attorney General's office to tell him the story of her daughter's ghost, and the ghost told her that the pills were suffocating her. Who did this to her? After that, the Attorney General went to Zona's doctor and asked him to examine her again to see if there were any signs of strangulation on her neck. The doctor said that she was a year old. I remembered now when I was examining Zona to make sure she was dead. Akras Musa was crying at her head and hugging her head while crying and stroking her hair. I see that he wanted to cover her neck with hair so that it wouldn't be visible. Also, remember that at Zona's funeral, Rasmus had a mustache and wrapped it around Zona's neck. His excuse was that this was her favorite scarf, so he wanted to bury it with him. I see that it was another attempt on his part to cover her neck and hide the fact that there were any signs on the neck. When they took the body out and removed the mark that was around the neck, they found marks all over the neck that looked like fingerprints. After further examination, they discovered that her neck she was dislocated and her windpipe was shattered. After that, Erasmus was arrested on charges of killing his wife. During the trial, Margine told the judge the story of a ghost. Her daughter came to her and explained to her how the ghost's head killed her. The testimony was very convincing to the jury, and they found that the person who read his name was guilty. After that, Musa's head was sentenced to life in prison, but he died after only 3 years of entering prison due to a mysterious illness. It was discovered that Akras had been married twice before. One of his marriages was to Zuna, whom he divorced, and the second died in a strange accident when she was helping Akras Musa fix the chimney of the house when a brick fell from inside the chimney and hit her head, killing her. To this day, there is a plaque near the grave in which Zuna was buried. This plaque says that this is the only case in which the ghost's testimony helped convict the killer, and that's it. And so far, the terrifying story has ended. Today's story, I hope you liked it. Don't forget, if you like this story or this video, to like and share it on all your social media accounts. Until I prepare new stories for you, I will see you soon and say goodbye.